Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hanover's latest online event. I'm part of a series focused on culture, diversity and inclusion. We're really pleased so many senior financial services leaders can join us, and really it's continuing what's been a very successful series of online events since the start of the year, and we've got more to come later in the year as well. Why do we do them? Well, it's part of our drive to raise awareness and encourage the conversation about the opportunities and challenges of culture, diversity and inclusion. And it's an area that our clients are increasingly investing time and money in, and also a really big focus for us internally at Hanover as well. Firstly, some introductions. So my name is Richard Waddell and I head Hanover's Leadership Solutions business. I'm also joined by my colleague Zoe Campbell, who's an executive search partner in our insurance practice, and she's also the culture, diversity and inclusion lead at Hanover. And of course, our guest speaker, Clarissa Farr, who I will introduce in more detail shortly. So, a bit of context first of all, for those of you that don't know Hanover already, we're a global provider of talent solutions, and we have a team of about 60 people, and have been working with clients for around 25 years. Our head office is in London, and we've got a presence across Europe, the US and Asia, and we specialise in 3 talent-related areas. So the first is executive search, what many of you will know us best for, so helping organisations to find first-class leaders and subject matter experts. The second is leadership solutions, the part of the business that I lead, which is helping clients to select and develop high-performing leaders, build effective teams and plan succession. And the third is market intelligence, and this is about providing insights and answers to key talent-related questions, things like salaries, structures and competitive benchmarking. So in summary, Hanover's expertise is in helping you to find, select, develop and deploy the very best people to grow your business. Before we hear from Clarissa, I'd like to share some key points with you. The first is that the event is being recorded and will be hosted online so that people who couldn't make it today can benefit from the content. The second is that everyone should be set to join, but please do remain muted throughout just to avoid any background noise. And the third and final point is that following my introduction, Clarissa will present for about 20 minutes and share some of her thoughts and experiences. During this presentation, please feel free to share your questions or comments via the chat box. And then Zoe will choose some of these to put to Clarissa at the end. Where there are similar questions, we'll extract the themes from those to avoid any repetition.
Hanover search.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So to our guest speaker today, very pleased to be able to introduce Clarissa Farr.
Good morning, August.
Kindly agreed to share her thoughts on attracting and retaining the next generation of women leaders. Clarissa is an expert in education and leadership, passionate.
No, I haven't, because I used my private email when
She's a speaker, a writer, a qualified coach, a mentor, and a non-exec director. From 2006 to 17, she was High Mistress of St Paul's Girls' School, one of the most academically successful day schools in the UK. Also passionate about the arts, and for 11 years was a governor of the Royal Ballet School. She's currently a fellow of Winchester College and a trustee of the African Gifted Foundation and the British Museum. Clarissa's first book, The Making of Us, Why School Matters, is her personal view of education and leadership today. Together, all of these experiences enable her to provide fascinating insights, needs and drives the next generation of women.
Has already received tablet.
So I'm very pleased to hand over to Clarissa. Please also remind everyone just to mute
well, I can get that right away and
background noise. But Clarissa, I'll hand over to you.
Richard, thank you very much indeed, and I'm delighted to be here. So thank you everyone for joining this morning. We've had some fascinating talks already in this series from Nansen, from Funke and Mbola about their perspectives, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about my perspective on leadership through the lens of education and schools, and especially girls' schools. I'm going to talk also about the challenges facing all leaders today. I will be looking
forward to my lines after. Thank you for re-establishing.
And then
I really appreciate that.
We have someone. Sorry, we have someone who's not muted, and I'm finding it difficult to speak.
Thank you.
Lisa, could you please mute yourself?
Super. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Peter, can we just ask that you mute yourself, please, because we could hear you in the background. Okay, Clarissa, I think you're okay to continue.
Okay, I'll carry on. So challenges facing all leaders today, and then something about what I think women in particular bring and what the young women are looking for. Then, of course, how we attract them and, crucially, how we retain them. I'm very appreciative of everyone who's busy giving up time to listen to me today, and I hope that in this session, everyone's going to take away 1 or 2 ideas that will be useful to them that they can go away and implement in their businesses. So, Jess, if I can have the first slide, please. So my perspective, I've been immersed in education all my life, and as a result of that, I know that we are all always learning, and there are always new possibilities of finding ways of seeing. And learning happens across the generations. Increasingly, more than ever, we're learning from people younger than ourselves. Just think about how often you've asked your teenage kids to fix your IT. We're always learning from the younger generation. So I think it's particularly important now, as we think about women's careers, that we listen to younger women. And I'm very optimistic that we can rethink the way that we see women and potential and have that growth mindset. I'm going to talk from my personal perspective. I'm not going to deluge you with lots of facts and statistics. I've been listening to the conversations of talented young women throughout my career in headship, what they mind about, how they think, what makes them tick. So my reflections today are based on what I know about young women from my personal experience of teaching them, of leading schools, and of course now also of listening to what they say later when they go on into the workplace and they come back to talk to me about that. I'm fascinated by leadership in all its forms, and especially by what that means for women, of course. And although many men are very comfortable with female leadership, not all yet see that as normal. And my experience is that when things get to be led by a woman. I'm going to gloss over the time that I came close to being assaulted by a father who was angry that I didn't accept his second daughter into the school. You read my book, you'll find out how that one ended. But there is work to do to get female leadership fully accepted. And of course, the demands in the domestic sphere do still fall primarily on women. If you see the front cover of my book here, that shows me with Adam when he was about 18 months old in the buggy, bowling along the cloisters of Queenswood. And I suppose that was an early example of working from home. Certainly, I'm very used to the challenge of blending career and family. And indeed, the day he was born, he came home from hospital 6 hours old, and his first outing was to the girls' boarding house, where the little girls were fascinated to see a brand new baby. And women too, in my experience of having large teams of staff, are often the ones responsible for looking after elderly relatives as well as the young. So if you're a woman with big responsibility at work in a leadership role, you may feel that there's pretty much nothing that isn't your problem and you're not responsible for. I've also learned that we learn most from the unexpected and the real. Of course, the students in my school learnt in lessons, they learnt doing plays, they learnt in the orchestra, they learnt on the netball pitch and the hockey fields. They learnt in those conventional ways. But we also learn when crises occur. And I vividly remember taking students on a trekking expedition to Nepal. This is when I was a teacher in Hong Kong, and thousands of tons of rock coming down the mountain completely unexpectedly above us having to scatter along the mountain path. There was dynamite being used to create a road further up the mountain. Nobody had told the trekking party that that was happening, and seeing that dust settle and calling the roll call, and thank goodness everyone survived. But that near-death experience was an incredible learning curve, of course, for all of us. And in the crisis we've had in the last few months, we've also been learning from something unexpected and something real. So I think, in the work environment, you can run as many crisis management days as you like. You can do as much raft building as you want, but you learn from reality. And we've had an incredible opportunity to do that recently together. So workplaces need to have a learning culture. That's what I want to communicate from my experience. Just like a school, they need a learning culture. If you want to read more about my thoughts on leadership, it's all captured in The Making of Us with various other anecdotes like the ones I've given you today. So, next slide, please. Leadership today then, what are the challenges? Well, we have, as you know, far too few leaders who are women in public life. So I peppered my slides with some of them. Here's Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, who's done a rather better job managing the COVID crisis than some other leaders. There's a lot of talk now about facing uncertainty. Leaders have always faced uncertainty because the future is never known, but we're much more aware of that, I think, now. There's that feeling of urgency, the burning platform, having to do things suddenly and quickly and effectively to make decisions on the hoof. In one school where I'm involved, for example, the headmaster said to me, it's taken us 2 weeks to get online learning up and running for the summer term. I think in normal circumstances, that learning curve would have taken us 3 years to climb. So it's incredible how quickly you can do things if you have to, and leadership counts then. So importantly, we need to develop human capital and work collaboratively. McKinsey released a study a couple of weeks ago about humanity and the importance of leaders showing their human side, that we need to coach leaders today into a being mindset rather than just a doing mindset. So leadership is as much about who you are as what you do. We've seen into one another's homes. You're seeing me now, not as a headmistress on a stage or line by books, you're seeing my kitchen behind me. So there is more vulnerability. There's a blending of the domestic and the professional that's come about, and that's highlighted the need to think of your colleagues as people in the round. And part of that also, to my next point, is finding purpose. What is it that really drives people? Is it achievement? Is it freedom? Is it stability, conservation, respect, enjoyment? Perhaps it's equality, justice, care. So the best companies now are thinking about how they align their purpose with the purpose of the individuals who work for them. What matters most to me, what matters most to my company. We're in a time of exacerbated inequality, of course. That's true within education, and it's true for women. Women do 3 times the amount of domestic work anyway. That's increased in COVID, and I heard our upcoming ambassador to the United Nations, currently ambassador to China, say that globally, the pay gap and life chances of women has gone back a decade. So we have a huge catch-up exercise to do, even greater one. We're living in a world of diminishing resources, climate change, the passion of the new generation. I heard it said yesterday will be the COVID of the next 20 years. So we have to have change mindsets. Leaders set the tone and the values of the organisation. And as Larry Fink of BlackRock says, when the leader speaks, people listen. He's a great passionate advocate of sustainability, as you know, and said recently there's going to be a lot more focus on customers, clients, family and employees. And finally, we have to think bigger. As the head of Cincinnati Children's Hospital said last week, we must use this inflection point to imagine our future together. And the key word there is together. So dog-eat-dog competitiveness in business has to be tempered by a bigger worldview and a much greater emphasis on collaboration. Thank you. Next slide. So who are the next generation of women leaders? Here's Julia Gillard, lawyer and ex-Prime Minister of Australia. And if you haven't watched her misogyny speech on YouTube, it's absolutely riveting viewing. I do recommend it. I said I wasn't going to give too many stats. We know that only 19 out of 193 countries today have a female head of state. And in the financial world, representation on executive committees last year by women was just 20%. So there is a lot of work more to do. it's important that we think about what's in the minds of these young women. So they're the product, first of all, of their education, an education in which they're taught to be empowered, to expect equality. One of my former students said, at school we commanded respect in our very nature. They're learning to be effective citizens, to have smart ways of doing things, and to know that being female is significant, but not a disadvantage to them. That's what they expect. So returning your look, what do I mean here? These young women are very self-aware. They talk at school about what it's like in a world where men look and women are looked at, as John Berger once said. And they know that they see more images of idealized female beauty in one day than their grandmothers would have seen in the whole of their adolescence. So the pressure on younger women is very great, but it's conscious because they think about this and discuss it at school, and they have this self-awareness and this capacity not just to be looked at, but to look back. So these bright young women who you want to hire have headlamps full on, and they know how to manage that aspect of culture when they go out into the world. They're aspirational. The very first word that my former student I spoke to last week said about the kind of work environment she wanted was that it should be that. She wants the same opportunities as her peers, and girls, she said, want to be seen as great minds, not safe pairs of hands. They're resilient, they expect challenge, and they want to succeed because of their talents, not just because they're women. They're self-starting. They expect, like all their generation, to make their own pattern of life. They're in a hurry, they want recognition early. Many of my girls at St. Paul's were starting online businesses. I had one girl, age 15, who was making brownies in the kitchen at home at the weekend and selling them online. Another one making cards and jewellery, was a similar sort of age. So they have this entrepreneurial and very initiativeful attitude to life. They're multitasking again, like all of their generation. Young women today will text the equivalent of the complete works of Shakespeare twice in their lifetime. May not be as edifying, but that's how much they will use their phones. So they're very used to their minds running on different streams at the same time. And above all, these young women are seeking impact. They believe in a bigger world. They are, remember, the sisters of Greta. They have their young voices out in the world, and those voices will not be stilled. It's a recent survey done by a young female undergraduate at Newnham amongst 25,000 undergraduates, and making an impact in the world was the most important feature of any career that they would choose. So this is important to understand, I think. If you're a business trying to attract these girls, they need to understand what you're for and why it would be important to come and work for you. Next slide, please. So why do we need them, if that's not already obvious? And here's Tsai Ing-wen, who is president of Taiwan, has the first female president that Taiwan has had. It's important because we're in a post-feminist age now, and it's about collaboration, and together is better. And I do commend to you the UN's campaign, He for She, uniting one half of humanity in support of the other, men working to empower women so that we don't lose 50% of the future leadership talent pool. There's lots and lots of research which shows that mixed teams achieve more and make better decisions. So funds, for example, managed by mixed teams, produce more reliable and less volatile results over time. And if you have a critical mass of women in any parliament, the government is 5 times less likely to respond to a crisis with violence. Women promote collaboration. They cross the floor to speak to the opposition. And so they're obviously excellent in conciliation and in client-facing roles of business. Many young men will work for female bosses, and it's got to become normal, and they have to be okay with that. We do really need to move on from a time where a female boss might be physically threatened because a male subordinate didn't like what she was doing, as happened to me. Next slide, please. So, my theme here is begin early. And Malala certainly began early. She's 23 now and won the Nobel Prize for Peace, as you know, in 2014. I think we need to reach down into schools where their thinking is forming. Don't imagine that young women are making their career decisions when they're 20, 21. They're thinking about what they want to do much, much sooner than that. So it's important to reach down into schools. They're also very discriminating. They're going to look for an ethical culture which is lived, which really speaks to them. One young woman I was talking to this week, who's in her late 20s, beginning to think about family, had a number of very prestigious job offers, but she chose the company on the basis of the parental leave policy. So you need to differentiate how you are speaking to that generation from your competition. We need people managers who really tune in to the mindset of the next generation. It's often assumed that those will always be female, not necessarily. And one thing to think about is that the survey I did at St Paul's amongst alums in the 25 to 35 age group revealed that sometimes senior women are quite hostile to those younger women coming up through the ranks. Well, I had to fight hard, so you should have to fight hard too, to need to pull up the ladder behind them. So the culture of encouragement's got to run right the way through the organisation. Having a climate of aspiration for all, one in which women are not just doing the diligent work in which men build their promotions. Using effective mentoring, this is a whole subject in itself, but I'm sure most people listening will be aware that peer mentoring is very effective, having a natural supporter who can help you refocus, but reverse mentoring, where younger women are mentoring older, more senior male colleagues, calling them out for unconscious bias, advising them, coaching them on how to be more empathetic to women so that there is a more equal culture promoted throughout the organisation. And of course, more traditional top-down mentoring where experience really can be shared. We need to show that it isn't skin deep. I think this generation of young women, they become cynical about the kind of generalist statements that get made on websites that aren't really borne out in practice. One of my students said that she'd gone to work for an American bank, which she thought had saying all the right things on the website. The first week, she was a colleague walked past her in the corridor and said, "Oh, hello, what are you going to do about the existential problem of being a woman?" Well, she didn't see that as an existential problem. So it's important that everyone within the business fully understands and is fully signed up to whatever it is you claim. And don't patronise. You've had a picture from me about what these girls are like. They want to be taken seriously. They certainly don't want to feel that you're only encouraging them because you have an eye to your diversity metrics. Thank you. Next slide. Just two more slides very briefly. So how do we retain them? Well, very briefly, I think we need to have transparent pay structures. Of course, gender pay reporting is holding our feet to the fire now, but it's revealing in most companies that the inequalities are caused by the fact that there are very few highly paid women because the women are not making it to the top. So it's how we keep women after real life crashes in and get them to go on into the senior levels. We need to have flexible working policies that are really lived out, as I've suggested. Use IT to make it a reality, and we've all got a lot better at that in the last 6 months. To show inspiring role models, but real role models as well. All leaders need to tell stories. As a head, I told a lot of stories about my own life, but they weren't stories that were designed to make me look good. Often they were designed to show my humanity to my students, to show my weaknesses, if you like, or my vulnerability, that I was a real person. So have the women who've succeeded and had families tell their story, but not make it sound like a walk in the park, just not the easy bits. Let younger women understand the realities of those challenges, because the authenticity is much more persuasive than what they would see as a sort of whitewash. Promote on potential. There is lots of evidence that women have to prove themselves far more to achieve promotion. They'll only be promoted on capability. When companies are in times of crisis, they're much less likely to promote or to appoint women onto their boards, for example. So make sure that you promote for the same reasons, and that promotion isn't dependent on social networking that excludes women, the pub, the football match, or the golf course. Celebrate parenthood. Here's somebody enjoying parenthood here. There's a new dad working from home. Parenthood teaches you so much that is transferable to your work. So it builds stamina. Anyone listening who's a parent will, I'm sure, empathise with all of this. It builds your negotiating skills. Have you ever tried to put the shoes on a toddler who didn't want them put on? It teaches you to invest in the future, and so many other human skills that develop through parenthood, which are transferable to your work. So parenthood shouldn't be something to be concealed, it's something to be celebrated. And of course, we have to encourage many more men to take parental leave and to share the burden of childcare with their partners. And as a sort of comforting note, I think finally recognising that not all the hurdles are in our control if we run businesses. Some of these are societal. And the idea that the domestic sphere is the woman's preserve in terms of responsibility, the mental shift as it's called, is so deeply embedded. This isn't something you're going to be able to eradicate. I was very entertained by a young woman, a former student of mine, who described a meeting of the women's circle in her bank, where a more experienced woman was saying to these younger recruits, now, when you have a lot on your plate at home, you need to outsource whole projects to your husband. Don't just give him odd things to do, outsource whole projects. Well, the language said it all. When the woman is still the CEO at home, doing the delegating, doing the thinking. And one takeaway from this might be, well, if a woman can be CEO at home, if you can't fight it, then use it. Think about the skills that she's demonstrating there and make them work for the business. Final slide, please. So we can see that real depth of awareness is going to be needed by future leaders. Great courage, good judgment, the ability to think quickly, the ability to be very flexible. There's going to be so much demanded of them. And as an educator, to me, this talks about really 4 levels of understanding. First of all, knowing the self, the intrapersonal understanding. So asking, who am I as a leader? Do I know myself? Secondly, the interpersonal, the ability to influence and motivate others. So asking, what can you and you and you do better than me? How can I empower you so that we can do great things together? The collegiate level across the company, the imagination to determine a culture or an ethos, how things are done around here, as you might put it. Creating a culture in which everyone pulls together, in which purpose is aligned, and which there's the deep desire to go above and beyond. So asking, what's the purpose of what we're doing here together? Why is it important? And finally, the courage to change the world for good. So having a strong sense of mission and impact over a much bigger scale, asking, how are we making a difference to the prosperity and the health of the world? And I believe, finally, in our time, the planet under threat, the world order recast by COVID, we have the opportunity now to preside over a fundamental change and to really make an important part of that, bringing women and the capability of women properly into the arena of equality with men. And I hope that some of that will have been helpful as you go back into your businesses today. Thank you very much.
Clarissa, thank you very much. Some fascinating insights and also some striking parallels between the education and business worlds as well. Just a reminder to participants, please do add your questions to the chat box and Zoe will put them to Clarissa shortly. But Clarissa, if I may, just before that, just to follow on from the information and insights and experience that you shared, a couple of questions. First of all, how do you think businesses can best work with schools and the education sector more broadly to ensure a strong pipeline of female talent? What's the best link there?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think, as I said, it really is important to get the attention of young women early, and certainly when they're still at school. And I think there are lots of initiatives in the area at the moment which are very successful. I know that Bloomberg and UBS have a program going into schools, sort of demystifying the banking sector. I think it would be great for businesses to choose great role models amongst their own young female employees to go and speak in schools. Young women are very influenced by people they think of as more of their own generation. So I think you can, and they're always looking for speakers. So I would recommend that. Certainly the Pauliners that I've taught love competing. So competitions, essay competitions, set a competition. What are the major economic challenges facing the UK in the next decade? And you'll find you get a dozen or more brilliant responses to that. And those might be candidates you want to keep an eye on for the future. Go in and run schemes and workshops that demystify the nature of your business, and perhaps you might set up a working group of young female employees to come up with their own ideas, because they are in touch with that generation and they will have great suggestions as to what business can do to really make relationships with schools and then nurture those relationships as those young women come through into university and then onto the job market after that.
Yeah, some great, very practical ideas. And Clarissa, building on that point and relating to it, what, in your experience, is the image of particularly the financial services world in the eyes of young women who are considering those sorts of careers? How do they see it?
Well, it's not, I think the image probably lags behind the reality, and that's why it's really important for people to get into schools. The Think Future study that I referred to earlier on about what undergraduates want from their working lives showed that actually fewer than a third of women were attracted to working in financial services. So, and I think the legacy of the financial crash of 2008 and the distrust that was bred then still resonates and reverberates a little bit through the image that financial careers have in schools. They're seen as conservative, male-dominated. There's a lot of talk about the rise of fintech companies, but one of my alums said to me, that doesn't alter the fact that most money is made in conventional ways. So I think slow to change would be the image, and not showing clearly enough that they understand the benefit of having diverse opinions. All that said, young women are ambitious and they want to work for the most prestigious firms despite all of that. So I think, and they are deeply influenced by the views of their own alumni who return. So your employees that you might send back into their own school will be very, very influential. And you have, I think, an opportunity through that mouthpiece, if you like, to change that thinking. And particularly now, at this point of a slightly chaotic point, it does release people to think in new ways. So I don't think the image is a great one at the moment. It's probably out of date, and there's a chance to make it different.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of that image and as part of the offer that financial services put out there to attract and retain talent, including women leaders, what else do you think that businesses could do to support mothers specifically to return to work after childbirth? Because that seems to be one of the key points where businesses lose good talent because they don't quite get that right, or there's certainly a very high number of challenges there.
Yes, well, I've touched on one or two. I mean, I was very struck I've been coaching a young woman who is very worried about to have her first baby. She's got a very responsible role in advertising, very concerned that when she goes back, she needs to conceal everything about what's happened to her, that she needs to go back as the same person that she left as. And I was trying to explain to her that how the experience of becoming a parent is additive to her capability, so to help her conquer that fear. So I think the message to business is to articulate the fact that motherhood does not make you less valuable to the company, to break down that fear, and to help women see their lives more holistically, if you like, and to help acknowledge that life is holistic. It's not just about what you do when you show up at work. There are lots of initiatives which are very practical to help returning women get back into the workplace gradually. So short-term projects, I was hearing Zoe actually of Hanover talking about that the other day, and also returnships, which are again short-term or time-defined, so that women can really make the adjustment. And of course, we just need to encourage men to take parental leave, as I said.
Yeah, okay, and presumably the experience of all of us through the pandemic will help in some of those ways, particularly in blurring that line between home and professional life.
Yeah, I think very much.
Yeah, conscious that there are some great questions coming through on the chat, so I'm going to hand over to Zoe at this point just to pose some of those to you, Clarissa, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thanks, Richard. Clarissa, the first question we have is from Una Kelly. And she's asked if is there any further research on the point that women do 3 times more domestic work, and also about the COVID crisis putting choices for women back 10 years. She's also raised the point, is this in danger of becoming self-perpetuating, as greater choice regarding work from home and men seeing more of domestic activities prompts opportunities for better conversations?
Okay, I think in terms of research, I would commend everything on the UN website to you, and then in terms of the domestic shift, a fascinating book is called Delusions of Gender by Cordelia Fine. I would recommend that as essential reading for anyone wanting to explore the whole idea of how domestic work is shared. What was the second part of the question? Sorry, go back to that.
Sorry, so the second part of the question was, is this, are we in danger of becoming self-perpetuating as a greater choice regarding work from home, men seeing more of the domestic activities prompts opportunities for better conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's kind of two-edged, isn't it? Now that the blurring of home and work has happened as a result of COVID, it's helpful in that it's probably made men more aware of what goes on in the domestic sphere. They've had to be part of it, but we know that women have taken the brunt of homeschooling, and therefore for some women they've probably regressed in their career as a result of it. So I think it's been two-edged, but broadly, I think the fact that it's made us think about people in the round much more, and speaking to this idea that leadership requires humanity, it requires empathy, it means pulling together. These are ideas that women leaders, I think, are, and one's generalising, of course, here because everyone is an individual, but in my experience, are generally already comfortable with. So you might say that a more feminised form of leadership is becoming the norm as a result of what's happened. Mm. And that will make it less binary when we're thinking about what it takes to lead.
Thank you. We've got a question from Vicky. I have found that the last 3 highly competent young women I've employed have had high levels of anxiety, which at times have stopped them from being able to do their job successfully. Do you agree that this is an increasing trend, and what do you think we can do as their managers?
I think, yes, because anxiety is caused by a variety of different things that has many different roots. I think many young women put themselves under a lot of pressure, expect very great things of themselves. And it's probably the flip side of a perfectionist driven kind of tendency that they have. I think it's important to acknowledge that and to manage that. We all know that mental health, or rather mental unhealth, is a major theme amongst young people today, and not just young women. So I think, as I would have done looking after any team of people need to be encouraged. They need to be caught doing things right and not caught doing things wrong, and their special talents need to be affirmed and built upon. And working practices and working hours need to be managed in a sensible way. And again, I think that's something that COVID has probably promoted rather than anything else. I acknowledge it's a problem.
David Peach has asked, I understand, but may be wrong, that by the time children are 8 or 9, gender stereotypes are already established through parental and media influence. What is your view, and how can companies work to change this?
Well, as I think I said earlier on, some of these perceptions are societal and are deeply embedded, and it's perfectly true to say that children's idea of their gender and stereotypical notions of what's appropriate for girls and what's appropriate for boys are socialized into them very, very young. And I'm not sure that companies can take on the responsibility of breaking all of that down. And in fact, by the time they get to you, it's probably too late. I think it is the job of schools to challenge that. And certainly in my experience in schools, the first step towards challenging anything is to make it conscious. And we would most definitely, in the schools I've led, be talking about this kind of thing, be recognising it, be naming it and identifying it. And I don't know how many fathers of daughters there are out there listening today, but I'm quite sure you're being trained by your daughter in how to deal with your unconscious bias if you happen to have it. So I think it's a lifelong challenge, but awareness is the first step.
Thank you. We have another question from LP. Any thoughts on how we can address the "she only got the job because she's a female, she's not actually the best" mindset that seems to emerge when companies openly seek to achieve male-female diversity, both for female leaders' peers and the female leader herself, i.e. imposter syndrome?
Yes, I mean, I don't think any young woman whom I've taught wants to get the job because she's a woman, as I've said. Women want to succeed because they're good enough. And I think it's undoubtedly true that to a large extent, historically, they have probably had to be, in many spheres, better than the male candidates in order to get the job. Because, as I've indicated, the research is out there that shows that there's a risk aversion to appointing women. And unless everything else in the surrounding circumstances is very secure, the tendency is to appoint the man. So I'm not sure what we can do about that, if you like, instantaneously. That you're really talking there, it's a very good question, about not just changing male mindsets, but also changing female mindsets. So the imposter syndrome is that woman thinking, I only got the job. I need to feel different or more grateful because I'm a woman. I think that's about coaching girls into feeling fully confident. And as my students said, feeling that we have command in our very nature, that we can look back when we're looked at and not feel that. So it's going to be an endless task, but very good point to point it out.
So, and this rolls nicely into our next question. What is your view on positive discrimination and the pros and cons of it to enhance diversity?
Well, it's a really difficult one. I mean, when you look at the stats on the gender pay gap, on representation of women in public life and in certain industries, you do despair, really, and think, well, can we wait another 100 years before there's pay equality? Surely we have to do something. So I don't want to be an advocate for positive discrimination for the reasons I've already said, but I think given the time frame and given the very, very slow pace of change, there may be a case for it, yes.
Thank you. And Sarah has asked, do you agree that one of the game-changing solutions to achieving societal change is the introduction to use it or lose it, shared parental leave in the UK?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think it doesn't matter. The problem is, it's not really about it's not about the regime that you bring in or what you make, what your policies are. It's about people's ability or willingness to adopt those policies. And whereas in some industries, I was talking to some students of mine in publishing, for example, it seems to be acceptable for men to take parental leave. There are other industries in which it doesn't matter what the policy is, it's seen as you're sort of less of a guy if you do that in some way, or you might fear that you will be passed over for promotion when you get back. And this is where a less binary attitude to what men and women contribute in the workplace has to come in, so that it's not seen as more significant for the man to be out of the work environment than it is for the woman to be out of it. So it's working away at that cultural, that deeper, if you like, more instinctive cultural perception. Certainly you've got to have successful policies, and you can incentivize using those policies in the way that you've suggested in your question. But it's actually getting into the mindset of men. I mean, that's a whole other talk, how we do that.
Thank you. How has the pandemic changed the way we might think about the challenge of attracting and recruiting women leaders?
Well, I think in many ways it's been positive for the reasons I've said, that it's blurred this line between work and home. It's made a sphere which is traditionally associated with women more acceptable as the workplace. And if you do any unconscious bias test with word association, all the words associated with home, I can assure you, everyone associates with women. You may not think you do, but you will do. If you go on to the Dads for Daughters website, our campaign we started at St Paul's, you can take an unconscious bias test there. So the domestic sphere is seen as feminine, less so now. And I think that that equalising of what is an acceptable, literally, backdrop for anybody may perhaps help to do that. And this idea that the qualities that we've had to find within ourselves to deal with COVID, the more feminised leadership will be seen as more important, more a thing that will be focal and essential to business success. We all know that businesses who invest in their people are more successful over time. Haymet Burr did wonderful research on, I think they do it every year, the world's most admired companies. They're all companies that place a high priority on investing in people. And this business of bringing women on is another facet of that, really. And it does lead to greater productivity and greater prosperity in the end. You just have to take that longer view.
Thank you. And final last question, Camilla. Clarissa, from Camilla. How important are senior schools in terms of developing young girls' leadership skills and confidence?
Well, thank you. Wonderful last question. It gives me my opportunity to fly the flag for women's only education in girls' schools, which of course I believe are a great arena to build these marvellous female leaders of the future that we all want to employ. The answer is that school is a very, very important arena for developing leadership, more important than university, because it lasts for longer, and it's a time when young women, young people generally, are moving through adolescence, forming their characters, thinking about what they want to do with their lives, what their values are, what's important to them. And school gives them many, many leadership opportunities, whether it's being the lead in the orchestra or the play or on the football field or whatever it might be. So practicing what it is to lead, what it is to bind other people behind a common goal is certainly something they need to be learning at that young age, yes.
Thank you, Clarissa. I'll hand back over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. Given the wide range of questions and everything that you've covered today and the insights that you've shared, do you have any final closing thoughts? How would you summarise, I suppose, the opportunities and the challenges in a nutshell?
I think the really important thing is the listening. As I said at the beginning, that companies need to be learning environments, listening learning environments, just like schools, and listening to the drives and the needs and the aspirations of that younger generation, really understanding that and speaking their language is the most important thing. Any great teacher knows that you have to not start where you are as the teacher, you have to start where the students are and lead them from there. So to hire the best and most talented young women, find out who they are, where they are, and listen to them and begin that conversation early and lead them towards you that way.
Fantastic. Well, Clarissa, thank you very much again for sharing so much of your experience with us, and in particular drawing the parallels to the business world. And thank you everyone who's participated for your time and for taking the time out of your busy day to be part of the conversation. As ever, we hope you found the session interesting and informative. We will send you a feedback survey after today's event, and we're very grateful for your comments because we're always looking to see how we can improve these events, but also trying to gauge the topics that would be most interesting to you. And we'll share with you a link to the video recording of the event as well. So please do feel free to send that to colleagues, contacts, again, to keep that conversation going. So lastly, on behalf of Clarissa and Hanover, we welcome the opportunity to have a follow-up discussion with you. This can be about diversity and inclusion or any other talent-related areas. And as part of the feedback process, we'll be in touch to gauge your interest in doing this. But for now, that's all from us. There'll be other events coming up in the near future. So please do join us for those. And we'll now close the meeting. Thank you very much and have a good day.